Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 9th of February. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Coalition forces are preparing a ground offensive against Islamic State forces in Iraq. That's reportedly the plan of United States and Jordanian security officials, who say that the end of the fighting will come only with an ISIS defeat. IBA's Margot Gukevich has more in this report.
Plans are underway for a major offensive on the ground led by Iraqi forces against the Islamic State. U.S. Envoy General John Allen has revealed. Coalition forces are preparing 12 Iraqi brigades who receive training and arms to pave the way for a ground operation that could begin in weeks. Allen told Jordan's official Petra news agency.
We've worked very hard at several levels to prepare the Iraqi security forces to do.
The strategy of the US-led coalition, Allen says, will remain unchanged. Its overall goal continues to be defeating the Islamic State. Allen praised Jordan's King Abdullah, saying he's an example of exceptional leadership.
His Majesty the King Abdullah, has indicated a desire to do more. I think it's galvanized the coalition, unified the coalition.
Speaking in Amman yesterday, Jordanian Air Force Commander General Mansour al-Jabbour said the Air Force will continue striking Islamic State targets, fighters as well as training centers. He estimated that some 7,000 ISIS operatives have been killed since Jordan joined the US-led coalition.
We identified 5 center of gravities for our air campaign. The first one is the leadership of Daesh. The second one is Daesh training center and logistics. The third is where Daesh get they funded and they earn the money supporting them. And our final center of gravity is Daesh garrisons, where they sleep and eat. We are determined to achieve the objectives of this war. And not only to degrade Daesh capabilities, we are going to destroy Daesh. And that is the aim. The crosshair of our weapons is at that target, and definitely we are going to achieve it.
In response to the murder of the Jordanian pilot burned alive by ISIS, Jordan launched a series of airstrikes, pounding some 56 ISIS targets in 3 days. Speaking on the last day of the Munich Security Conference, US Senator John McCain criticized the lack of international action against Syrian President Bashar Assad.
We are conducting airstrikes against Daesh while Assad's aircraft drop barrel bombs on innocent civilians a few towns over. We say we will train and arm young Syrians to fight against the greatest threat to us, but offer nothing to protect them as Assad continues his attacks on them and their families. This is a recipe for failure. It is also immoral.
Yesterday, a squadron of United Arab Emirates F-16 fighter jets, pilots and technicians arrived in Jordan. The fighter jets are expected to resume airstrikes alongside Jordan against ISIS targets. The Emirates decided to suspend airstrikes following the Jordanian pilot's death, amid concern about rescue and search capabilities if any of their pilots fall into ISIS hands. With a coalition-backed Iraqi ground offensive against ISIS expected to start in the weeks ahead, it is unclear whether other countries will deploy troops and whether the coalition will be large enough and strong enough to turn the tide of battle and defeat ISIS. Margot Gukevich, IBA News.
Turning to election news, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is accusing the nation's largest newspaper of conducting a smear campaign while reiterating his plans to address the U.S. Congress. Here with all the latest is IBA's political correspondent Eli Wogelenter.
With continuing pressure to cancel his speech to Congress, there have been reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was looking for a face-saving way to postpone the trip to Washington until after the March 17th elections. But it appears that Netanyahu is determined to issue his warning against Iran and will not back down. A senior government official told the Jerusalem Post yesterday that Netanyahu is, quote, determined to go and make the case against an Iranian nuclear deal. Netanyahu seems to believe that the speech against an Iranian nuclear deal cannot be delayed until after the election and the establishment of a new government. He feels by then it would be too late, even if his presence is exacerbating tensions with the Obama administration and with Democrats, a number of whom have indicated that they may not be present when Netanyahu speaks before a special joint session of Congress. There is a reported deal being worked out to get Netanyahu to cancel his speech in exchange for a closed-door meeting with Republican and Democratic leaders, and perhaps even an invitation to the White House. As for the political effect of Netanyahu's speech, an Army radio poll found that 63% of respondents said they were not affected in terms of whether it would lead them to support Netanyahu in elections or not. 19% said the speech reduces their likelihood of voting for him, while 12% said it increased the likelihood, and 6% said they hadn't even heard that he was going to the Congress. The same survey found 47% thought he should cancel the speech, 34% thought he shouldn't, and 19% didn't know. Turning to the election campaign itself, Netanyahu came out swinging this morning in a frontal attack on Yediot publisher Noni Moses. "The time has come to put things on the table," Netanyahu tweeted. "The main source behind the wave of slanderous allegations against me and my wife is Noni Moses, the publisher of Yediot Achronot and its subsidiary website, Ynet. He has no qualms about using every possible means to topple the Likud government, headed by me, and to shut down Yisrael Hayom." That newspaper is owned by Netanyahu supporter Sheldon Adelson and distributed free of charge. A lawyer who said he is not a member of any political party filed a petition yesterday to the Central Elections Committee to close down what he termed a propaganda platform in favor of the candidate masquerading as a newspaper. Meanwhile, Ba'ad Yehudi leader Naftali Bennett has caused a little storm with remarks about the lack of police enforcement in Arab communities. At a conference last night for first-time voters, dozens of 12th graders walked out after Bennett said police do not enforce the law in Arab villages and that you can no longer park your car by tourist sites in the Negev because it will be broken into. Bennett said that in East Jerusalem you can no longer visit the Mount of Olives or Mount Scopus, and you can no longer enter Arab villages and cities. And that, above all, is harmful to Arabs because the State of Israel has decided that the rule of law may exist in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Ra'anana, but not in those places. When the offended students left the room in protest, Bennett called after them, "That has always been the way of the left, to run away. Run away. We are staying in this land. We are not running away. Whoever wants to run away can go. Those who want to fight and stay and fight. I'm not going anywhere." And that's today's election news. Erin?
Thanks for that report. Well, with just 5 weeks to go to Election Day, a new poll conducted for the Times of Israel today shows a 4-seat advantage for the Zionist Union over the ruling Likud party. The merger, headed by Isaac Herzog and Tzipi Livni, garnered 27 seats, while Prime Minister Netanyahu's faction received just 23. The United Arab List had 11, as did Habayit Yehudi and Yesh Atid. Moshe Kachlon's Kulanu party followed with 10, while Israel Beitenu and United Torah Judaism each had 7. Next came Shas with 5. Then both Eli Yishai's Yahad Ha'am Itanu and Meretz had 4. The survey reflected that 24% of voters are still undecided, but that an increasing majority of them say that they will not be choosing Likud. Even if these numbers and trends remain on track, however, the Zionist Union may still have a hard time cobbling together a coalition of 61 or more seats following the March 17th Knesset election. Joining me now from our Tel Aviv studio is Times of Israel pollster Stephen Miller from 202 Strategies. Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
Now, according to your poll, the Zionist Union has 27 mandates, while Likud has only 23. We're a little more than a month away from the elections. Do you expect that this gap will further increase, or it's going to shrink?
The gap should actually shrink, and I'll tell you why. First of all, a lot of these undecided voters have turned on Netanyahu. But what could change the nature of this race is that if Herzog becomes perceived as the leader of the center-left and as a serious, credible candidate to Netanyahu, as I think he has established himself, this could cause fear among the right that would see support from parties like IsraelPalestine, Kulanu, and Naftali Bennett vote for Likud. And that's what I'm hearing from a lot of the campaigns. But our numbers suggest that many of these center-right, and even some right-wing voters have soured on Netanyahu. That his numbers have gone down, and that these undecideds are undecided because they've yet to determine that they'll be voting for Herzog, which is why when we break them down, we give him 27 seats.
Well, now, based on these numbers, do you think that Herzog could have trouble forming a government?
You know, it's the fascinating part about Israeli politics in that election day on March 17th is just the beginning of the real election, and that's who can get to 61 seats. I have a lot of sources inside the different campaigns, the different parties, and I do believe that many of these parties, despite how they appear ideologically, are very excited to sit in the government and not outside of the government. And so when the negotiation gets down to ministries and budgets and committee chairmanships, it's anyone's game. Certainly you want the best position, the best poker hand going into that negotiation, which is the highest result that you can as a party achieve on March 17th.
Which parties at this point do you assess as having the best potential for growth over the next 5 weeks?
Well, certainly we're looking at the center and potentially the center-right as the areas of growth. So again, the Zionist Union, I believe, has the opportunity for growth. On the timesofisrael.com, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the numbers on Herzog tomorrow, and I invite your viewers to take a look. But he is still, and about 1 out of 5 voters, they still don't know who he is, have an opinion of him. And so we predict, based on the analysis of the data, that as he becomes more and more aware, he'll get to those 27 seats. If he fails to do that, if he fails to communicate to the voters, and certainly on those economic issues, then we could see a rise in parties in the center or center-right, such as Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, or Kulanu, led by Moshe Kachlon.
Well, it should be an interesting little more than a month. Stephen Miller from 202 Strategies, thanks so much for sharing your insight with us today, and we hope you'll join us again soon.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. In other news, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians was front and center at a panel discussion on the Middle East held at the Munich Security Conference yesterday evening. Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Dr. Yuval Steinitz and Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Malki may have shared the stage, but there were no points of convergence in their messages.
The new phenomenon is that jihadist groups, some of them were mentioned, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Jabhat al-Nusra. There are some Palestinian jihadist groups like Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Listen to the name.
But also I think the Palestinians would not put Hamas in that same
Islamic Jihad.
Yeah.
But what really going on in the Middle East is a new phenomenon. Those groups that usually were working in the underground before are popping up above ground, are taking under control large areas of cities and fighting all the infidels. Infidels are Jews, infidels are Christians, infidels are Yazidis, Kurds, and also moderate Muslims.
We have been trying for so many years, in order to be able to reach a peace agreement. Israeli intransigence was preventing that from happening. The building of Israeli illegal settlements on Palestinian occupied territory was preventing us from achieving that. And it's what's very clear that Israel has to admit that their occupation of the Palestinian territory has to reach an end, and that the Palestinians have to deserve to have their own independent state and their self-determination.
In other regional news, a shipment of U.S. arms has arrived in Lebanon. 70 howitzers were among 26 million rounds of ammunition and heavy artillery shells in military aid to the Lebanese army. The U.S. ambassador to the country observed the unloading of the $25 million cargo as it was being unloaded at the Beirut port. Lebanon is the 5th largest recipient of U.S. foreign military funding, with more than $100 million in weaponry sent in 2014 and more than $1 billion of assistance since 2006. Lebanon's security has been jolted by the civil war in neighboring Syria, as well as the involvement by Hezbollah on behalf of the Assad regime.
This is top-of-the-line equipment. This is the best that there is on the marketplace. It's what our soldiers use, and I know that in a matter of days is going to be what your brave soldiers are using in the battle to defeat terrorism and extremism that's pouring across the border from Syria. I have every confidence that with the right equipment, Lebanese soldiers and Lebanese army can defend Lebanon successfully. I have no doubt in my mind about that. And we're proud partners of this, of course, because this is a common enemy. And our support for you has been, and for the army, has been swift, and it's been continuous. And we're going to continue with this until the job is done. I know that this is exactly what the Lebanese army leadership has asked for, and it's exactly what the Lebanese army needs in order to accomplish that goal.
On to Egypt, where soccer fans have contributed to another fatal tragedy, leaving about 20 dead. The latest sports-related violence comes nearly 3 years after a similar incident that claimed a record 74 lives. Alexander Jen joins me now with the details.
Well, Aaron, the story is all too familiar for Egyptians. Fans there, known as ultras, have a reputation for being very rowdy and deeply politicized. Their actions last night before the game have once again led to death and destruction instead of sport. It was utter pandemonium before the soccer match between Zamalek and NP in Cairo. As tens of thousands of ticketless fans tried to force their way into the stadium, clashes began to break out. Police used tear gas in an attempt to get the situation under control, but were unsuccessful. Although the actual cause of the riot is still unclear, it appears that a combination of suffocation from the tear gas and stampeding led to at least 19 deaths. On this night, the stadium was prepared to allow just 10,000 fans into a space that has a capacity of 30,000. This because of previous unruliness by ultras. Almost exactly 3 years ago, on February 1st of 2012, another deadly riot broke out in Port Said, Egypt. This riot occurred after the game between Al Ahly and Al Masry finished, killing 74 people. Al Masry fans stormed the field and began attacking the rival supporters. The Egyptian courts ultimately sentenced 21 people to the death penalty for the rioting. Ultras are known as the most organized movement in Egypt and generally support the Muslim Brotherhood, which has since been outlawed. Many of them participated in the uprising that forced Hosni Mubarak out of power. And since then, tensions have run high between police and ultras, including the Zamalek fan group named White Knights. They claim the rioting began because of the narrow, barbed wire entrance used to let the fans in. Despite the fatal rioting, the game was played and finished in a 1-1 draw. Due to this deadly incident, the Egyptian Football Association has announced that they are suspending league activity in the country until further notice. Aaron.
What a shame. Thanks, Alex. Well, here at home, some 3,400 daycare workers today staged a nationwide strike against their working conditions, impacting 15,000 children under the age of 3. At this morning's demonstration in front of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, organizers claimed that they launched the sanctions to bring attention to the wage discrimination that they suffer, as well as the shortage of manpower. The caregivers blamed the ministry for limiting their terms of employment and status as neither salaried nor self-employed. A Druze combat soldier serving in the Golani Brigade was attacked over the weekend by a group of Jewish partygoers in a nightclub at Kibbutz Yagur. 19-year-old Razi Hassesi from the Druze village of Daliat el-Carmel has been hospitalized in fair condition at Haifa's Rambam Medical Center after undergoing surgery for facial injuries. 2 suspected assailants were arrested and released with restrictions placed on their movements. Police say that the reported cause of the attack was when the victim was heard speaking Arabic to a friend. Another Druze resident of the same city, recently discharged from the army, was assaulted 2.5 weeks ago in Jerusalem, allegedly for the same reason. 6 suspects were arrested in that case. The number of anti-Semitic incidents in Britain has reached record proportions, prompting an all-party parliamentary inquiry to call for urgent action to counter the trend. The report found that many in the Jewish community of 260,000 cope with insecurity. Spurred on by anti-Israel protests during the Gaza summer conflict, there were an astounding 1,168 separate anti-Jewish incidents reported across the country in 2014, which is an increase of 535 from the year before. Prime Minister David Cameron called the report hugely important and said that disagreements over foreign policy can never be allowed to justify anti-Semitism or any other form of racism, prejudice, or extremism. According to a survey conducted last month, 1/4 of British Jews are now considering leaving the country, and more than half feel that they have no long-term future in Europe.
I know that many Jewish people in this country are feeling vulnerable and fearful, and you are saying that you are anxious for your families, for your children and yourselves. I never thought I would see the day when members of the Jewish community in the United Kingdom would say that they were fearful of remaining here in the United Kingdom.
The number of anti-Semitic incidents in Britain hit a record high in 2014, with more than double the number in 2013, according to new figures from the Community Security Trust. The organization said Thursday it recorded 1,168 incidences across the country in 2014, up from 535 cases documented in 2013, and the highest yearly total since the group began monitoring anti-Semitism in Britain in 1984. There were 81 reports of violent anti-Semitic assaults, including a victim being verbally abused and hit with a glass and a baseball bat in London. Most of the reported incidences were not as extreme.
Turning now to sports, and all too often soccer matches can be boring, goalless draws, but not so last night when league leaders Maccabi Tel Aviv battled up-and-coming Maccabi Netanya to a 3-3 tie, which was somewhat surprising for Tel Aviv, who have notched shutouts in 7 consecutive games. The result means that Tel Aviv will have next week's showdown with second place Ironi Kiryat Shmona, while now just 2 points ahead of the Northerners on the Premier League standings. The Yellow and Blue came back from a goal down to later take a 3-2 lead on the 77th minute score by Aran Zahavi, only to concede an equalizer from Dia Saba 2 minutes later. Turning now to entertainment news, and music's greatest stars turned out for the 57th Annual Grammy Awards in Los Angeles last night. 22-year-old Sam Smith was the event's biggest winner, first anointed as Best New Artist, then his debut album, In the Lonely Hour, was recognized as the best pop vocal album, and Smith's heartbreaking single, Stay With Me, was crowned Best Song of the Year. Rocker Beck kept the British soul singer from making a full sweep by scoring Best Album of the Year with his surprise release of Morning Phase. Other notable winners of the gramophone-shaped trophy were Beyoncé, who took home 3 Grammys, including Best R&B Performance for Drunk in Love, and singer-songwriter Pharrell, who also scooped up 3 awards, including Best Pop Solo Performance for the song heard around the world, Happy.
I was so prepared for everybody else that is so talented in that category to walk away with that award. I'm honored actually to be grouped with them. You're really great artists.
Taking a look at local finance, and the shekel today put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were down across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team is telling us to brace ourselves. Here comes winter again. We can expect unseasonably chilly temperatures tomorrow with thunderstorms in the north and center of the country, accompanied by snow on Mount Hermon, strong winds and sandstorms in the south. Sorry about that gloomy forecast, but here's what we'll see at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'll be back at this desk tomorrow, same time, same channel. Hope to see you then. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.